Welcome everyone. Welcome to our special Sama Saturday. We come together every weekend with Sama Dog Wellbeing for dogs and their humans to talk about just that. Different aspects of well-being, the way that we influence, interact, our lifestyle with our dogs and ourselves, and the way that we can bring all of this into a place of more health and healing. So every second Saturday of every month, as you may know if you follow along with us, we do a special Sama Saturday with Dr. Kangas, our most favorite and amazing holistic vet, our dear friend, a light in the county of San Diego, and a healer to so many of us, humans as well as animals. Animals formally, humans informally, but she certainly has helped heal me in many ways. So we are very happy to be together today and to have this opportunity again to interact and to hear from you guys, get a lot of your questions answered. Our topic is all about the grain-free conversation. So there's all kinds of hype out there right now and for the last few months about grain versus grain-free dog food. You know, for many years it was like everybody was really into that grain-free, that's what your dog needs. It's causing everybody to have allergies. Pay no mind to the quality or the poor quality of the food that obviously was having an influence. But by going to grain-free, we were kind of able to bypass some of those problems that came up for our dogs. And then all of a sudden, those diets started also not proving to be so healthy and working out so well for our dogs, at least some of them. So all of this has created a lot of confusion. No one really knows what to think when it comes to grain-free versus grain-full food anymore, me included. And why we are especially excited to talk to Dr. Kangas about this is because she wrote an article on exactly this topic in this month's Dogs Naturally. It'll be backwards for you guys because we're on Facebook Live, but this is the January issue of the Top Dog, Natural Dog magazine, the industry leading magazine. And she's got a great article in there all about this conversation. Is the grain-free protein, grain-free diets, is it good for our dogs, and what is it doing for them? So I learned so much by reading this article that I'm extremely excited to share this conversation with you guys and to give Dr. Kangas an opportunity to reach out to more of you and to help clear some of the confusion. So get your questions ready if you have any. I think a good place to start, especially after reading the article and starting to understand all of this more deeply myself, is it's really about the composition of the food. And it's not that these certain foods are so bad for our dogs, but how we alter it that can be harmful or beneficial. So why don't we start there?
Awesome. Yeah, and there's much confusion that was created by the report that came out from the FDA that there is cardiac disease, or most specifically dilated cardiomyopathy. In this study was actually a very specific breed too. It was just golden retrievers, but they linked apparently dilated cardiomyopathy or heart disease to grain-free diets. But the media can skew things very easily by giving you a tiny piece or a small portion of the information, which can really mislead people and, as Amanda said, cause a lot of confusion. And grain-free diets, just like diets that have grain in them, can have a lot of plant material like legumes and lectins and potatoes and things like that. And the high volume of them, if your dog or a dog is consuming a diet that is high in ratio of plant proteins, especially when those plant proteins have been heavily processed with high heat, it alters the digestibility of it, and this has been shown to have some effect on the absorption of taurine. And then there are certain breeds like the golden retriever, boxers, Dobermans, and some others who we think have issues with synthesizing taurine to begin with. Mm-hmm. And honestly, taurine is not typically required in a dog diet. It is required in cat diets because they don't synthesize enough on their own to meet their requirements. Mm-hmm. But dogs normally synthesize taurine from other proteins that they're eating, from the amino acids in proteins. And those would be meat proteins, fish and eggs and things like that. But it appears to us that there are certain breeds that have trouble synthesizing enough of their own taurine. And then when you add these high lectin or heavily processed foods with lectins and lentils and potatoes and things like that, it appears that it alters the absorption and then can affect the scenario even more. And so that could have been, the issue in this scenario. However, it's important to mention that diets that have grains in them have also been shown to do, the same things. So grain-free versus, because rice-based diets can also contribute. So it's not just grain-free as it was sort of portrayed to be.
Yes, and I think it's interesting that in this particular article, when it first came out and then others came, but it depends on the media outlet. It was like I don't remember which, but it was some big media outlet.
Yeah.
So that's why everybody is very mainstream. So it wasn't the Dogs Naturally or some, dog even wellness publication. It was a mainstream, and therefore a bunch of people that don't really know much about dog wellness are all reading it and freaking out and sharing it, and it was all over the place. So back to the very beginning though, Dr. Kangas, that's one thing that's important to note, is the difference between a with grain and a grain-free diet is that they're using different foods to supplement what once was grains, like oats and rice and
wheat.
And so instead of that, corn, instead of that, they're putting in these other ingredients, like you said, like all the peas and the starches more, right? What else had you mentioned? Chickpeas, regular peas?
Potatoes. Yep, sweet potatoes and lentils, beans.
So that's kind of bulking up the food, aside from the protein and the meat.
And it does have protein in it, so it's being used as a protein source as well.
Yep, and it's bulking up the food, it's creating more substance for them. But that's why they're receiving so much of these ingredients that they once did not receive.
Exactly.
And the way that the food is being prepared is altering these particular ingredients in a way that is not absorbable or absorptive properly by the dog's body.
Exactly.
So it's not the food, it's the way they process it.
Exactly. And there's two issues, is the proportion of lentils or potatoes or, these vegetable, non-grain ingredients. It's the portion in the diet. If it's a low portion in the dog's diet, that's very different than if it's a high portion. And then the other factor is if it's prepared correctly and it's sprouted or fermented and not heated at high temperatures, it acts very differently in the body. So when you get a high proportion of them in the food, which tends to be more of some of the grain-free foods out there are going to have high portions of this, and then when it's heated and processed, those two things together create more problems. And a higher quality food that's grain-free, there's a lot of wonderful high quality grain-free foods that the main ingredients are still meat proteins, meat, fish, or egg proteins. It's when you get the poorer quality grain-free foods that use the bulk, the lentils and the potatoes and things like that, the peas will be the primary ingredients. That's where you run into more trouble.
That's really good.
Those are the kind of diets that were associated with these issues in the golden retrievers that was reported, and it caused such a scare amongst people. Obviously, pet parents, rightly so, but if you are feeding, and my preference is to always encourage people to transition to a much lower processed diet, less heated, more nutritious, but that would negate a lot of that problem anyway. And then even if you're on a more processed food, if it's higher in meat-based proteins and lower in the other, grain-free ingredients, the problem still is not going to be what it was for these dogs in this study.
Yep, now we're really starting to understand it, I think. I hope you guys are too. And it's one of those things like anything when you first hear about it, right? Maybe the first time it comes in, it's super confusing. You're just like, okay, wait. So is grain good or not good?
Right.
After a 20-minute conversation.
Yeah.
But then as you start to hear it again and again, you do start to understand that, as you said, the bottom line is the poor foods, the cheaper, the lower grade foods that are the problem. And so if we're going higher grade, and I think it's always good, this is what I recommend to all of my clients, I think you do too, is variety in the diet. So if they do have like a base food that they like we do the Honest Kitchen at our house, we have like a base food, and then we're adding a lot of meats, we're adding our raw, our fresh frozen raws, our freeze-dried raws, we're adding fresh foods that we prepare for us and them at the house, and that is
exactly. And
it all.
the more variety over time, the better always. And I am a big proponent of mixing and matching different kinds of things. And In general, raw diet tends to be my preference, but there's no one right diet for every animal or every household. So it depends on what fits the budget and the preference of the pet parent and how the pet does on that diet.
Yeah.
But I do like mixing and matching a lot of things, and regardless of what type of diet they're on, adding some of the really functional, or I call them beneficial or medicinal foods, such as fresh eggs and fresh meats and coconut oil and
yogurt,
fermented foods and raw milk and bone
sardines.
broth, and sardines. So all of those things can improve any diet that you're preparing for your dog or presenting to your dog, and so that's always a benefit.
Mm-hmm. This is Sage, everyone, by the way. Didn't mean to be rude and not introduce our new friend on the set.
Yes.
Just wanted to welcome those that are just joining. My name's Amanda Ree. I don't even think I ever said my own name on here. My name's Amanda Ree. I'm the founder of Sama Dog, Wellbeing for Dogs and Their Humans. Every weekend we do a Sama Saturday. Every second Saturday of the month we do it with our dear friend Dr. Katie Kangas, and we take on some of these topics of wellness for our dogs that are confusing or that our audience has shared that they want more information on. So this is a community effort of getting this knowledge out. So what we're talking about today is the grain-free versus non-grain diet confusion. Is it good for my dog? Is it not good for my dog? And all of those questions that come along with us. Dr. Kangas has already laid down the foundation. So if you happen to miss this, know that it's recorded. It'll be put back on the page, the Sama Dog page. It's also uploaded to YouTube, so you all know all of these, and so you can always go and watch them again. So, okay, so we talked about the processing is what it's all about. If we can get a high quality food, whether it's with or without grains, just reduce the amount of that like processed food.
Exactly.
And add some fresh, ideally.
Yep.
And so, yeah, my question, the number one question that comes up always around grain-free is allergies, it seems like. That's like where we got there, it seems, right?
Yeah.
It's like where everybody was eating grain-free because there were so many allergies. What's that all about?
Well, allergies are rampant for dogs, and of course for humans it's becoming much more of an issue. And in the beginning we really thought that the wheat, the corn, the soy was causing a lot of problems, and I'm sure it is. But dogs could easily be allergic to proteins, and even a lot of the veterinary dermatologists now are looking more at proteins as being allergenic than necessarily the grains. So there are a lot of issues that play into the role of allergies, but bottom line is dog bodies were not designed to digest and function off of grains, and so it makes perfect sense to aim for diets that are much higher in meat, proteins, and honestly fat. We're leaving fat out, and that's a whole nother awesome topic that we should talk about someday.
We should talk about
but
that.
I'm definitely encouraging more and more fat content, healthy fat content, and a lot of the medicinal foods that we just listed off are luckily high in healthy fat. But that also is a huge benefit, and that's kind of leaning towards ketogenic diets or modified ketogenic diets. But those are anti-inflammatory in general, so they can help allergies as well. But a lot of the grains, the corn, the soy, the wheat, and here's the thing too is wheat has gluten, and we can talk about that because that's a big issue. And corn and soy are GMO, GMO produced,
Especially what ends up in dog food.
Exactly.
This is not
so
human grade in most cases.
Exactly. So that alters everything too. And when you have, GMO produced things, these are all affecting the gut, and so we can get into the topic of glyphosate, which is the toxin or herbicide in Roundup that is also affecting the inner lining of the gut, as does gluten or gliadin, which is the breakdown of gluten that's in wheat, of course. That is also affecting the inner lining of the gut. And so the interesting thing is that when not only do you get leaky gut syndrome with an altered and damaged lining of the gut, but you get a shift of the microbiome, which is the beneficial bacteria that live in the intestines and live in the system. And when you add gluten or gliadin together with glyphosate, and all these crops are sprayed with glyphosate, those two together create exponential damage on the inner lining of the gut. And that also lends to the microbiome shift. So when you get all of these things added together, that's where you get this synergy of damage that really affects how dogs are digesting their lentils and or the grain-free types of things, the potatoes and the peas and things like that. So the digestion changes, the microbiome shifts, and that completely makes a difference in how nutrients are absorbed, and that's tied in with the taurine and the grain-free, but it's important in everything. It's important in digestion, and it's important in overall health.
Yeah, for humans,
Absolutely.
just exactly the same.
And the microbiome, I mean, we're
going to focus on that one next time.
Okay, great.
Really in on dog microbiome specifically.
Awesome. I mean, it's absolutely critical for overall health.
Yeah.
And just as a quick, perspective that's really interesting is that when you weigh the, volume of cells in the body or count them in number, we are more bacteria than we are human cells, and your dog is more bacteria than it is canine cells. And that gives everyone a very creepy but quick perspective on how we need to really be aware of nurturing our microbiome and not intaking things, be it toxins or different foods that affect that. So really critical.
Being more mindful as our environment changes and as unfortunately toxins do increase in our food in most cases. Of course, there's a lot of work being done on that, but it's there, especially for our dogs. So as the toxins increase in our life, we have to be even more aware of what we can do to balance that out.
Exactly. And just as a quick mention, the herbicide glyphosate, which is in Monsanto's Roundup, which is sprayed on so many crops now, it's actually not only an herbicide, but it's actually an antibiotic.
Yeah, I read that in your article. That was interesting.
So talk about directly affecting the microbiome, but this is all part of the picture that's leading to such antibiotic resistance across the board for pets and for people. Yeah. There's too many antibiotics being used in general. There's antibiotics being used in our food animal system, the animals that people are eating.
There's antibiotics in our water now.
Exactly. It's just system. Right. So and unfortunately Roundup or glyphosate has really made a huge impact in all of that too. But a lot of factors that contribute.
Yeah, well, it was interesting. I did a poll with just starting yesterday with our audience just to see what's the percentage of grain-free versus grain. And 2/3 of them are grain-free food, 1/3 with grain.
Okay.
So most people are still in that grain-free realm. So just to kind of address that before we take some questions from our audience, do you suggest that people change the food itself if they're already feeding a high-quality processed food, or just reduce that high quality food and add in more fresh?
Always for adding in more fresh. I mean, I don't think you necessarily, if you have a high quality food that's mostly meat, proteins, meat, poultry, fish, eggs, you're in a good category, put it that way. But I always have the preference to put as much fresh food in the diet and remove as much heavily processed food from the diet as possible. Yeah. And that of course applies to us as well. Yeah. So and I always work with people understanding everybody's on a budget, and when you have multiple big dogs in your home especially, it can be much tougher to feed extreme high quality across the board, but all that you do makes a difference. So even if there's some heavily processed food in the diet, if it's a good quality selection, and then you do your best adding and mixing and matching in some of these other things, then you're making a profound impact and benefit for them. Yeah. So yeah.
What I'm looking at down here, everyone, so you know, is my computer. So I'm just seeing, I was looking at the poll, but also just seeing your comments and connecting with all of you that are on. And I always try to use this so that I can see your comments more easily, but sometimes it doesn't really work out more easily. But I do see that Heather's on with us. Jennifer. Annette has a question. Hello, Ella. Also, Ella's joining us from the Netherlands. So Annette says, what do you recommend for dental care then? For dental care, I mean, somewhat
Maybe
of a different topic.
Yeah,
but
maybe a different topic.
yeah, we will address
speak to
that, but we'll just keep it on the grain-free topic.
And what I could say really briefly that is slightly associated with the topic that we're on is that, just to clear this up for anybody who doesn't already know, is that dry food, heavily processed food, does not do any benefit for teeth health, for dental health, for cleaning the teeth. And that's definitely been a very widely believed misnomer for decades. And we now know that heavily processed food actually promotes more tooth decay. Okay, so the fresher the diet, the better off your pet's dental health will be. Now, we also want to add in dental hygiene and daily dental care at home if possible, and professional cleanings and all that. But just know that the fresher food that you provide for your dog, the better off their dental health is going to be. And dry food does not help at all crack tartar off the teeth.
Yeah.
So
you brought up something good once that I always stuck in my head is, unfortunately, if sometimes your dogs will vomit after they eat, you see that there's full kibble there.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, obviously they didn't chew it all up and to make it this perfect little pulverized mix that works their teeth in the meantime. They just absorbed, they just inhaled it.
They barely chew anyway, so dry kibble can't really do much. And I mean, you look at their design and their canine teeth, and they're made to kind of rip, tear, swallow. They may chew on something for a while, like a bone later or something like that, but they're not a species that was designed to sit and chew their food before they swallow it. That's why their digestive tract is very different than ours, because it handles things very differently.
So interesting. So here we have, my computer idea isn't really working, so I'm just going to get up here and say hello to everyone. Yeah. Nice see, the computer says like 3 people have commented, but many more. So Victoria's there, Jennifer's there, Lorraine with us, Linda. Oh yay, Linda Bender. She's the veterinarian that I'm writing, that I'm collaborating with, and so Linda's here and watching. That's nice. And Sherry, Ella, Jake, hey Jake, and Katya. Tori is with us, our dear friend. Jennifer. Heather, Jake says hello. Annette says, okay, I was told dry food would help with dental care. Yeah, so that is exactly what we suspected. So that's exactly it. Yeah, we sure did. And that's just not so. So let us know if you have any other questions, everyone. Definitely put them in there. So we were talking about allergies, why things come up, why allergies are triggered. There's many different reasons. Bottom line is the microbiome. It all goes back to the health of the gut, and that really is going to help your dog with its allergies or its hip problems or its behavioral issues in many cases, or it's overweight or whatever it may be. By really regulating that gut, now we're helping their entire body.
Absolutely.
So that's like the one place to really focus it.
Yeah, leaky gut syndrome we think is literally at the core of most illnesses, definitely chronic inflammatory patterns and allergies. So anything we can do to help repair the gut and keep the gut integrity strong and intact is going to be absolutely beneficial. And so there's many ways that we can do that. There's some new products that are out, and
we'll talk about those.
Talk about Restore. But what's being put in the body obviously makes a huge difference. And the other thing that I've become a big fan of as well is fermented foods. So, and I know we touched on that briefly, but fermented foods are very powerhouse nutrients for the body, and that will also help to nurture the microbiome. And I actually used to be really a huge proponent of putting all of my patients on probiotics, and even myself on a regular basis. And now I'm really, and you can make a case for probiotics, a probiotic product if, you're immune suppressed, or you've just been on antibiotics, or you're on antibiotics, things like that, or maybe you're traveling and you really want to help support your system. But for the most part, taking the same probiotic all the time with just a few species of bacteria, now that we know that our microbiome is enormous and vast, and we want the more diversity in the microbiome, the healthier the dog is and the healthier we are. And so that can actually be nurtured better with fermented foods than with a single probiotic product that you take again and again and again. Yeah.
For 5 years.
Exactly. So I'm kind of moving over a lot more to fermented foods and suggesting that for my animal patients, as opposed to taking the same probiotic for long term.
Makes sense. And probiotics are not cheap. Good ones are not cheap. And so you might as well take that money and what Dr. Bush taught us when we were all together with him, the man who is really focused in on all of this, the researcher, he explained how if you had just taken antibiotics, if you just went through something that really suppressed your microbiome, then yes, maybe antibiotics at that time, I mean, not antibiotics, probiotics at that time.
I should have corrected you.
Are a good idea. Yet, in the longer term, like you just said, the food is really where it's at. So I was excited to think, okay, well, I'll have probiotics on hand when need be, but otherwise I'm going to take the money that I've been investing into those probiotics, which is quite a lot every month, and I'm investing it now into other foods, fermented foods, and I really have seen a huge change in my dogs, not only in their coat, but also like little, it is random, but I just noticed this the other day, little things, little skin tags, lumps, little growths, little body extras, let's say, would come up a lot with my dogs here and there. And now I've noticed ever since we shifted their diet so dramatically, we don't have anything like that coming up anymore. Not to mention their teeth are so much cleaner, and their eyes are brighter, and their ears are cleaner, and all those things.
Every health parameter can be, recognized with improved nutrition and improved microbiome and immune system health. So it all makes a difference. Yeah.
Oh, it's so good. So let's see what you guys have to say. Oh, Jennifer's here with us too, my friend. Have you ever seen a case where grain-free diet didn't work for a certain breed or animal?
Didn't work in what way? For
maybe for allergies is maybe what Jennifer's saying.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
absolutely.
me too.
Because again, grain-free just typically means no corn, soy, or wheat. Or some of the, brands. And I even recommend for the most part, go low on any of those, if not omit them from the diet.
Yeah. Which are those again?
So any of the, corn, soy, wheat, rice, barley, and I mean some of that in small portions for some dogs, but for the most part, going low on those ingredients is going to be an advantage.
And those are really the allergens. Like those are the triggers, and they're so poorly sourced, right? Like you said, that's kind of where.
Oftentimes, and it's it's the processing too that makes a difference. But other allergies can be caused by other things too, like proteins and things like that. So anything can be an allergen or simply a reactive food because there's inflammation going on in the body, and so even if the body's not truly allergic to an ingredient, it may be that that's just adding to the inflammatory picture right now, and it's more of a reactive food or a temporary issue. So that's part of the scenario too. It's a little bit complicated, but it's it definitely makes a difference.
Yeah, and even though the details are complicated, and you kind of do need to be a vet or a doctor to really, really understand it, or a scientist, what's great and what I hope we all know, and now we can leave our audience with, is the more fresh food, the better.
Absolutely.
The less processed food, the better. It doesn't so much matter if it's grain-free or without grain, or with grain or without grain, grain-free or with grain. It does matter more so the quality of the food. So get a with grain food if you want, but get a high quality. Absolutely. And add lots of great fresh foods, especially fermented foods, and your dog or you have a much better setup right there.
Absolutely. Yep.
You're still achieving the goal. You're very much achieving the goal. You're actually really achieving the goal that you were looking to achieve in the first place by doing all this strange selection with our foods.
Right.
Yeah. So I saw that Tess just jumped on and wanted to, I know that hi Tess, she had a question. I know a dog that she has in her care has a heart murmur. So any thoughts on that? I was saying, Tess, you should come see Dr. Kangas if you haven't seen her with that particular dog. I think would be great. All of you who are nearby in San Diego, just side note, Dr. Kangas is right down here in this beautiful office, brand new offices in Sorrento Valley. So definitely get on her books and come be a patient, because then it can be obviously more individualized for your needs. That said.
Heart murmur, that may not be related at all to the specific type of cardiac condition that was associated with the grain-free. So just because a dog has a heart murmur is not a big concern to all of a sudden, worry about whether there's grain or not in the diet, or, that the diet is grain-free with the lentils and potatoes and things like that. That is not necessarily at all going to directly affect a heart murmur. But there are many nutrients and things that we can do to support the body to have a healthier heart and for the heart to function more optimally. So that's where I would agree with Amanda, a session with me would be wonderful, but in general, by the way, I mean, there's a lot of nutritional supplements and things that I would recommend for any patient with a heart murmur or a cardiac problem, but in general, especially in Chinese medicine food therapy, when you have an ailing organ in the body, feeding more of that organ is absolutely beneficial. So if we have a dog or a patient with cardiac disease or heart murmur, I would recommend to feed more heart organs.
So interesting.
So yeah, and if you're doing a raw diet, there should be some heart and liver and kidney included in the organ meat ratio in that diet, but you can do additional, and there's air dried treats and dehydrated treats where you can do more heart in there. You can purchase that and do it yourself, whether that's raw or cooked. You can get beef heart. It's a little easier to find liver, but you can definitely find heart and other organ meats, and so those would be really great things to include. And the muscle meat, the heart organ, it is a muscle, but it's a organ muscle, is going to have nutrients in it that are going to really nourish good heart function, and so it's going to have increased levels of like L-carnitine and CoQ10 and things like that. So there's a lot we can do with nutrition, and there's things that we can do with herbs and other modalities depending on the type of cardiac condition. So a murmur doesn't, and I should back up and say it really depends, because sometimes there's what we call innocent murmurs or physiologic murmurs. So dogs can live with heart murmurs for years to a lifetime with no cardiac disease ever developing.
Yeah.
Or it can be a murmur that is specifically caused by a problem in the heart, whether it's a mitral valve or whether it's a thickening of the muscle or thinning of the muscle and things like that. That can lead to problems, but it's definitely variable and it depends. So having some more information and background can really help me be of most value to each individual, but there's definitely some things across the board that can be recommended nutritionally always.
Yeah, and just that feeding the organ, it's such an interesting way of working with food as medicine.
Yeah.
And I've heard that you say that a lot of times and seen a lot of good results from that. So, always good tips here at Sama Saturdays. Always good tips at Dr. Kangas. Well, thank you all so much for watching. It's been wonderful to be able to share this with you. If you know anyone that is confused about this or has brought it up recently, or you've been at a dinner party chatting about grain-free food, like people like us do that, then link this to them, send this to them, or just tag them below and loop them into this convo. But we've really enjoyed having all of you. Thank you. Our next Facebook Live with Dr. Kangas is February the 9th, the second Saturday in February, and that's when we will be talking about the microbiome in dogs and really get into even more detail. Oh, these guys are feisty.
We'll talk about Restore then?
We will.
Okay.
And Luma Pets will show some props
Fantastic.
too. So lots of love, everyone, to you and your furry friends. We'll see you next time. Thank you, Dr. Kangas.
Thank you. Bye-bye. My pleasure.
Bye.